Hey guys. Tonight we're going underground, literally. Imagine crouching down, your knees pressing into damp earth. A faint metallic scent curling through the air as you descend into the narrow mouth of a tunnel. The light fades behind you, replaced by a living, breathing darkness, the kind that feels thick, like it's wrapping around your shoulders. Welcome to the Cu Kai tunnels, the legendary underworld of wartime Vietnam. And trust me, you wouldn't last 5 minutes down here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where and when you're listening from. Are you under a blanket in Chicago? Or wide awake in a quiet corner of Hanoi? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch lower, your shoulders scraping against the packed earthen wall. The air tastes faintly of rust and clay. There's no room to stretch, not even to lift your head fully. You shuffle forward, palms pressed into the dirt, and every breath feels like it has to fight its way through the heavy stillness. The tunnel doesn't welcome you, it tolerates you. And that's being generous. A single flashlight flickers ahead, held by someone who clearly knows their way around. You try to keep your breathing steady, pretending you're fine. Pretending the darkness doesn't make your heart tap against your ribs like a trapped bird. It's fine, you whisper to yourself, even though the walls seem to press closer. Listening. This isn't just a hole in the ground. It's a labyrinth, a world carved by hand, inch by inch, by people who decided that if they couldn't own the sky, they would own the earth beneath it. Built first during the war against the French in the late 1940s. Expanded massively during the Vietnam War. This network stretches for hundreds of kilometers, enough to connect entire villages underground. You stop to catch your breath. But the air here doesn't help. It's stale, hot, and thick, like trying to breathe through a damp towel. Somewhere in the dark, water drips, slowly, steadily. Each drop feels like time itself leaking away. You think about the people who lived here for years, eating, sleeping, fighting, hiding, all in this confined space where even standing up straight was a luxury. Above ground, bombs rained down, helicopters roared, and villages burned. Down here, silence was survival. You crawl forward again, and your knee brushes against something smooth. A bamboo stake. Your guide whispers, "Watch your step." You glance down and realize it's not just a stake, it's part of a trap. A reminder that these tunnels were never meant for comfort. They were weapons in themselves. Invisible and patient. It's hard not to admire it. The sheer cleverness of it all. Every inch of this place was designed with intent. Narrow passages to fit only small bodies. Air vents disguised as termite mounds. Kitchens that cooked without smoke. Hidden trapdoors camouflaged so perfectly that even the forest floor couldn't tell the difference. And then there's you, panting, sweating, a tourist of terror. Your guide moves easily, barefoot and calm, while you're certain that if the ceiling drops another inch, your skull will leave an impression in the clay. You pause again, trying to imagine what it would have been like in the 1960s. When these tunnels were alive with whispers, footsteps, and strategy meetings, a soldier might have slept exactly where your knees are now. Listening to bombs shake the earth above him, waiting for the moment to rise and strike. The war you read about in history books wasn't just fought on battlefields. It was fought in these suffocating veins beneath the soil. You catch a faint sound, your imagination. Maybe a heartbeat that isn't yours. The tunnels have a way of echoing life back at you. Each sound is distorted, like it's being remembered by the dirt itself. You wonder if the earth ever forgets what it's seen. Your flashlight flickers. For a split second, darkness wins completely. You feel it, a wave of primal fear. Your mind starts inventing movement around you, a whisper, a breath, the memory of someone still crawling beside you. You tell yourself it's nothing. You hope it's nothing. When the light steadies again, you notice faint scratches on the tunnel wall. Fingernail marks, maybe, or just erosion. You tell yourself it's erosion. There's no airflow, no breeze. Sweat runs down your back and soaks into your shirt. You try to take another deep breath but stop halfway. It feels like the air has already been breathed by too many people before you. Still, the deeper you go, the more your fear shifts into awe. You can't help it. It's genius, brutal, simple genius. A system of resistance carved from mud and willpower. Entire armies failed to understand it. Helicopters searched in vain. Napalm burned forests. But the tunnels endured. When the sky fell, the ground refused to give up its secrets. You keep moving forward, inch by inch, until your knees ache and your palms are caked in clay. The light from behind fades. Only the faint glow ahead keeps you going. You start to feel what those soldiers must have felt, a mix of terror and purpose, of exhaustion and defiance. Somewhere above, you imagine sunlight filtering through the jungle canopy. Birds calling, the ordinary world, so close yet unreachable. Down here, the world is reduced to touch and sound and breath. There's no horizon, no wind, no time. Your guide whispers again, almost there. You're not sure if that's meant to comfort you or challenge you. Because down here, almost there, could mean another 20 meters or another lifetime. A bead of water falls from the ceiling and lands on your neck. You flinch. The guide chuckles softly. You try to laugh too. But it comes out shaky. And as you crawl deeper still, you start to understand something unsettling. This place wasn't built for survival, it was built for endurance. There's a difference. Survival is day by day. Endurance is forever. You pause one last time before turning a corner. The tunnel ahead yawns open slightly, revealing a faint orange glow, a sign of life. Or at least of history preserved. The air feels a bit cooler here, touched by memory rather than fire. You wipe your forehead, smearing dirt across your face, and think, you really wouldn't last a day here. Still, you move forward, because that's what they did. And somehow, that's what makes you want to keep going. Deeper into the story of a war that refused to stay on the surface. You crawl onward, and the tunnel narrows again until your elbows scrape both walls at once. There's no turning around now, you've committed. The air feels thicker here, pressed down by decades of history and the weight of what it meant to live beneath the earth. A bead of sweat rolls from your temple, stings your eye. And you can't even lift your hand to wipe it away. You blink instead, squinting into the dim light ahead. The smell changes as you move deeper. Less like soil, more like metal and something faintly organic. Like the inside of an old coin mixed with the musk of old wood. You shift your body forward another inch, your knees crunching against the dirt. The ground feels warm, almost alive. You realize it's not your imagination. Down here, heat doesn't dissipate, it collects, trapped by layers of packed clay. You're learning quickly that the Kai tunnels weren't built for comfort. They were built for control. You have no freedom to move, no sense of direction, no ability to predict what's ahead. And that's the point. These tunnels were designed to turn intruders, people like you, into terrified, clumsy animals. Every meter you crawl, you understand why soldiers called this place the Black Hole of Vietnam. A muffled sound echoes somewhere ahead. You freeze. It's faint, like a tap. Then another. It's nothing. Your guide whispers behind you. Just water dripping. You're not sure whether to believe him or not. Down here, sound doesn't behave like it does above ground. It folds back on itself, slides along the walls, makes you doubt your own senses. Claustrophobia isn't a fear of small spaces, it's the fear of being unable to escape. And right now, that fear breathes down your neck. You imagine what it must have been like for soldiers who were ordered to enter these tunnels during the war. The so-called tunnel rats sent to hunt the invisible enemy. Most were barely 5.5 feet tall, armed with nothing more than a flashlight, a pistol, and the kind of courage that makes no sense outside of desperation. You try to picture one of them now, American uniform caked in sweat and mud, trying to crawl through the same hole you're in. Every second could mean a tripwire, a snake, or a booby trap triggered by a loose touch. Their heartbeats must have sounded like explosions, their flashlights like fragile promises. Some never came out again. Others emerged pale, shaking, unable to speak about what they saw. You move forward another few feet and feel the air shift slightly. A current brushing against your face. Vent shaft. Your guide murmurs. You tilt your head and see a thin vertical tube carved into the dirt. No wider than a soda can. Air comes from above, he adds. You nod, even though the idea feels impossible. This tiny passage sustaining life for hundreds of people? Yet somehow, it did. You imagine it during wartime. Soldiers above searching for air vents, dropping grenades or gas into them, while below, people held their breath in silence. Entire families living on a rhythm of fear and endurance. You wonder how they didn't lose their minds. Maybe they did, or maybe the human mind just bends differently when it knows there's no other choice. You reach a small chamber, the first real opening since you began. It's only about the size of a closet, but it feels enormous after so much crawling. You sit back against the wall, your spine grateful for the brief reprieve. The guide smiles faintly. Rest, he says. This is the sleeping area. You glance around and see smooth patches of earth flattened where bodies once lay shoulder to shoulder. No beds, no mats, just soil. You touch it. It's cool now, but you can almost feel the warmth of ghostly bodies lingering there, like echoes of breath. Your guide tells you softly that soldiers could stay underground for weeks, sometimes months. They ate rice stored in sealed jars, drank water filtered through sand, and moved in silence. Every sound could be death. So they learned to whisper, to listen to the vibrations through the soil. Some even said they could tell what kind of bomb was falling just by the tremor it made. You close your eyes and listen. The earth hums faintly, not in a mystical way, more like the memory of energy still trapped here. There's a pulse to this place. Steady and quiet, like it's still alive. You crawl again, this time downward. The slope steepens and the air grows hotter. Your flashlight beam dances over the walls, catching tiny scratches, marks left by digging tools. Or maybe fingernails, each one a signature of effort, of determination. It's easy to forget that these tunnels weren't built by engineers, but by villagers, farmers, students, mothers, children, people with calloused hands and bare feet who decided to carve a world of their own when the one above became too dangerous. And it worked. The U.S. military called it the most sophisticated guerrilla network ever built. The irony? It was mostly dug with shovels and baskets. You laugh softly, partly out of disbelief, partly out of admiration. It echoes weirdly off the walls. Laugh all you want, the guide says quietly. But they survived here. You wouldn't. He's not being cruel, just honest. You feel it too. The growing realization that this wasn't a story of fear, but of control. The darkness, the heat, the suffocating silence, these weren't side effects. They were weapons. The tunnels didn't just protect the Vietnamese soldiers, they transformed them into ghosts. Impossible to fight, impossible to predict. Somewhere above, the jungle must still be rustling. Birds calling, leaves shifting in the humid wind. But down here, the only movement is your own slow breath. You're beginning to lose your sense of time. Minutes blur. Your thoughts slow down, dragged through the mud of memory. You reach another fork, two narrow passages leading in opposite directions. The guide points left. That way is safer. You hesitate. And the right? You ask. He shrugs. The right hasn't been opened in decades. His eyes glint faintly in the light, and you can't tell if he's joking. For a heartbeat, you wonder what would happen if you went right. You imagine crawling alone, the air growing thinner, the silence thickening until it's no longer silence but pressure. You picture finding something, an old shoe, a helmet, a ghost of someone who never left. You blink the image away. You follow left instead. Your back aches, your knees are raw, your palms sting with grit. And yet, there's a strange peace in the rhythm of crawling. Maybe this is how they coped, by letting movement become meditation. Every inch forward was defiance. Every breath, a small act of rebellion against the sky that wanted to kill them. A faint breeze brushes your cheek again, carrying the smell of earth, smoke, and history. Somewhere in the dark, a drop of water falls, and another, steady like a metronome. You whisper to yourself, I couldn't survive here. And the tunnel seems to whisper back, you're right. But it also says something else, something quieter, almost kind. They did. And that makes you crawl onward, deeper still, toward the part of the story where survival becomes invention, and invention becomes legend. The tunnel ahead widens just enough for you to shift from crawling to crouching. It feels like a luxury, your spine creaks, your neck sighs in relief. But that moment of ease doesn't last. Your guide raises a hand, signaling you to stop. He presses one finger to his lips and then points toward the ground in front of you. You squint. The soil looks the same as before, dark, damp, unremarkable. Then you notice it. A subtle difference in texture. A small depression too deliberate to be natural. A false floor. Booby trap, your guide whispers, as if the tunnel itself might overhear. You freeze. Suddenly, The air feels sharper, the shadows deeper. You lean closer but not too close, because curiosity kills more than cats in a place like this. Beneath that thin crust of soil could be anything: sharpened bamboo spikes smeared with poison, or a simple pit waiting for the weight of an unwelcome intruder. During the war, soldiers called these punji traps. Simple, cruel, effective. You picture an unsuspecting man stepping onto what looks like solid ground, only for it to vanish beneath him. The jungle and the tunnels didn't just hide people, they participated in the defense. Nature was drafted into service. You try not to imagine the sound it would make. The sudden cry, the silence that followed. The tunnels were not a battlefield, they were a chessboard. Every square, every move, every inch of dirt could be a trap or a salvation. You sidestep carefully, mimicking your guide's movements. He grins over his shoulder. Now you're learning. It's strange, that flicker of pride. You're sweating, trembling, probably pale as chalk, and yet you feel a tiny spark of accomplishment for not falling to your death. The absurdity makes you chuckle softly. And your voice sounds out of place here, too light, too alive. Back then, the guide says, some traps were meant to kill, others just to wound. A wounded man needs rescuers. 3, maybe 4. That's how you slow an army. It's strategy by suffering, grim but ingenious. You let that thought sit in your mind as you crawl forward again. Your senses sharpened. Every sound feels like a clue. Every shadow like a warning. The tunnel twists sharply left, then right again, and opens into another chamber, larger this time. You step inside, careful where you place your feet. The walls are reinforced with timber beams, blackened by time. Command room. Your guide murmurs. Meetings, maps, plans. You look around and can almost see it. The flicker of candlelight on determined faces. The faint murmur of whispered commands. A map scratched into the dirt. Fingers tracing routes of attack and retreat. Someone coughs quietly in the corner. Another scribbles in a notebook by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. It's hauntingly human, not heroic in the Hollywood sense. Just ordinary people doing impossible things under impossible pressure. You kneel, brushing away a layer of dust, and find a small wooden peg still stuck in the wall. Maybe it once held a coat, or a bag, or a weapon. It's nothing, and yet it's everything. Proof that life happened here. Your guide lowers his voice. The tunnels had 3 levels. The top for fighting, the middle for living, the deepest for hiding. For when the bombs came. 3 levels, like a world turned inside out. Civilization rearranged vertically. The upper level for chaos. The middle for endurance. The bottom for survival. You reach out, pressing your palm against the cool dirt wall. It's solid, reassuring in a strange way. The people who built this didn't have engineering degrees, they had desperation, patience, and an understanding of the land that went beyond textbooks. They knew how the soil breathed, how water flowed, how sound traveled. Even animals helped. Your guide adds, dogs, rats. Each side used them differently. Americans brought dogs to find the tunnels. Vietnamese spread pepper or chili to hide their scent. You grin despite yourself. So spicy food saved lives. He chuckles softly. Maybe. Spice and stubbornness. You both move on. The ceiling dips again. The air grows thick with heat and tension. You duck low, your back brushing the earth. You can hear your own heartbeat now, steady and loud. At one point, you feel something brush your ankle. You flinch, half expecting it to be alive. It's just a root, long and brittle, reaching down through the ceiling like a hand. Still, it feels intrusive, like the jungle above is watching. In the dim light, you notice more marks carved into the wall, symbols maybe. Or directions. A triangle, a short line, then 2 dots. You ask what they mean. The guide shakes his head. Code. Every group had their own. Some lost to time. You think about that. Messages written in dirt. Read by people who no longer exist. Language itself dissolving back into the ground. Then the guide says something that sticks with you. The Americans feared the tunnels. The Vietnamese feared what was above them. Everyone was afraid of something. You nod. It makes sense. Fear was the true constant of war, shifting shape, changing sides, but always present. You crawl through another narrow stretch. This one sloping downward. The temperature rises again. You can't tell if it's from the earth or from your own body heat trapped in such a small space. Suddenly, the ground beneath your hand gives slightly. You freeze. The guide looks back quickly. Raises a hand. Wait. He leans forward, taps the soil once with his finger. Listens. Then exhales. Loose patch. He says quietly, "It's safe." You don't breathe until he moves on. Every inch here demands faith. In the guide, in the ground, in luck. Without it, you'd go mad. Maybe that's why the people who lived here learned to move like shadows, slow, deliberate, almost silent. You can't panic when panic kills. When you finally reach another chamber, the guide stops and lets you stand up again. Your muscles ache, but you're grateful. He points to a narrow wooden door in the wall. Hidden entrance, he says. Behind it, another route. Used only if trapped. You realize this entire system isn't just defensive, it's alive. Constantly adapting, changing, evolving, like a living organism protecting its heart. You brush the dirt off your hands. Take one deep breath, and glance back the way you came. The tunnel yawns behind you, endless. Patient, unblinking, you feel small in comparison, but strangely connected. Because for all its darkness, there's something undeniably human about this place. Not the violence or the fear, but the will to keep going. Even when there's nowhere left to go. You whisper softly, "Who could survive this?" And the guide replies, "The people who had no choice." The words hang in the still air, heavy and true. Then he gestures ahead. "Come on, you haven't seen the underground city yet." You take one last look at the false floor, the traps, the hidden walls, and realize that above all, this wasn't just a war zone. It was a world, a dangerous, ingenious, claustrophobic world built by people who refused to vanish. And as you move forward, the tunnel seems to close in behind you. Like a mouth swallowing the light, the tunnel begins to widen. And for the first time in what feels like hours, you can almost straighten your legs. The ceiling arches higher, the air less suffocating. You blink as your flashlight beam sweeps across something unexpected, structure. Walls reinforced with bamboo and timber. Beams carefully fitted together. You realize you've stepped into something bigger than a tunnel. It's an entire hidden world. This, your guide whispers. his voice bouncing softly off the earthen walls. Wasn't just a passage, it was a city. You stare. The space is still small, maybe the size of a modest living room, but it carries the weight of civilization. A narrow tunnel branches left toward a storage area. Another right toward what the guide calls a kitchen. Straight ahead, a low corridor dips into what looks like another hall. Dark and humming faintly with echoes of the past. You crouch, heart thudding, and it hits you. This place once pulsed with life. Soldiers and villagers moving in sync. Whispering orders. Boiling rice. Tending to the wounded, all underground. Unseen, untouched. The jungle above was chaos, below. A calm determination. 3 levels deep, the guide says, connected by trapdoors and crawling spaces. Above us was the front line. Below us, survival. You try to imagine the logistics, water, food, waste, air. How could they manage it? Yet somehow, they did. The tunnels had wells, kitchens, command rooms, even hospitals. There were sleeping quarters for hundreds of people. Weddings were held down here. Babies were born here. People lived entire lives without seeing daylight for months. You touch the wall, it's cool. Smooth in some places, rough in others. The earth feels strangely intimate, as if it remembers every breath that's ever been taken inside it. Your guide crouches beside an opening, brushing away dust to reveal a small rectangular doorway barely wide enough for your shoulders. This led to the meeting room, he says. Commanders planned operations there, sometimes right under the feet of American bases. You blink. That close? He nods. Sometimes just 10 meters apart. Up there, they drank coffee. Down here, they made history. You let out a quiet laugh, not from humor, but disbelief. The audacity of it all. A war fought in 2 worlds that barely touched. The soldiers above, armored and armed, hunting shadows. The people below, barefoot and silent, reshaping the ground to their will. You duck through the doorway, and the space beyond surprises you again. It's not large, but it's deliberate, a hollow dug with intention. Not desperation. There's a low wooden table in the center. Its surface uneven and scarred. On it sits a rusted teapot, long since emptied, and 2 tin cups. The air smells faintly of smoke and age. This was the headquarters, the guide says. They drank tea here before missions. Sometimes rice wine, if they had any. You can almost hear it, the low murmur of conversation. The nervous laughter before danger. The metallic clink of cups. These weren't ghosts of war. You think. They were hosts of it, patient. Stubborn. Invisible hosts beneath an unwelcome sky. You notice the ventilation shaft in the corner. A thin bamboo pipe that snakes upward through the soil. Your guide explains how they disguised the openings as termite mounds. Even the dogs couldn't smell the smoke. He says with a grin. It came out so slowly. It looked like morning mist. You whistle softly. Engineering genius. He shrugs. Desperation is the best engineer. That phrase sticks with you. Because it's true. This city wasn't built by architects. It was carved by necessity. 1 handful of dirt at a time. Every tunnel, every chamber was the result of sweat, fear, and invention. You shine your flashlight along the wall again, and it catches on something shiny, metal embedded in the dirt. You crouch, brushing it free, a bullet casing. You hold it between your fingers. Its weight strangely personal. Someone fired this. Someone ducked from it, and now it lies here. Silent witness to a war that never really left. People forget. Your guide murmurs. That war is also about waiting. Waiting for air raids to stop. Waiting for news. Waiting for the courage to go back up. You glance at him. Did they ever get used to it? He pauses. No one gets used to darkness. They just learn to move through it. The simplicity of that answer chills you more than the air. You follow him into another corridor. Narrower. Lower again. The beam of light trembles slightly as your arms begin to ache. You pass storage alcoves lined with crumbling wooden boxes. Inside, you glimpse rusty cans, fragments of clothing, a battered pair of sandals. Someone's whole life, reduced to artifacts of endurance. You duck under another archway and enter what looks like a small communal area, the underground equivalent of a town square. The ceiling is higher, the air oddly fresher. Ventilation, the guide explains. The city needed to breathe. You stand there, breathing with it. The silence feels alive. If you listen closely, you swear you can still hear murmurs, footsteps, the crackle of a radio, laughter that refuses to die. Then you notice carvings in the wall, names, initials, small marks etched into clay. You run your fingers over one, LN 1968. It's barely legible, but it's enough. Someone was here, someone who probably didn't expect to be remembered, yet left their mark anyway. You take a deep breath and feel the weight of history pressing closer. Not the kind found in textbooks, but the kind that smells of dirt and sweat and quiet courage. Your guide gestures to a narrow passage that slopes upward. The kitchen's ahead, he says, but be careful. The floor still hides secrets. You nod, ducking your head as you move forward again, and a chill runs down your spine. Because as remarkable as this underground city is, you can't shake the feeling that you're trespassing in a memory, one that's alive, patient, and still watching. And somewhere, maybe deep within the earth itself, the tunnels seem to sigh, as if remembering the countless feet that once moved through them with purpose. Not curiosity. You tighten your grip on the flashlight. Whisper, "Let's keep going." The guide nods, and you both vanish deeper into the living heart of the invisible city. You smell it before you see it, the faintest trace of smoke, mixed with something woody and ancient. It's not unpleasant, exactly, just odd, out of place. The air feels warmer here, humid with the lingering scent of cooked rice and damp clay. This was the kitchen, your guide says softly, crouching low to enter a chamber no taller than your shoulders. The Hoang Kam stove, named after the man who invented it. You duck in after him, your flashlight cutting through the haze. The space is small, barely enough for 3 people to sit cross-legged. The walls are darkened with soot. But what catches your eye are the narrow tunnels snaking upward from a clay hearth, tiny vents twisting like roots. You follow their paths with your light, realizing they stretch all the way to the surface. Smoke tunnels, your guide explains. They carried the heat far away. When it finally escaped, it was cold and invisible. You blink. They cooked down here without being seen? He nods. Without being smelled, too. The smoke came out through distant holes disguised as termite mounds. Sometimes half a kilometer away. Even American planes couldn't find them. You whistle softly, impressed despite yourself. That's genius. He smiles faintly. It was survival. You crouch closer to the hearth, tracing the grooves in the clay. The stove is primitive by modern standards, but you can feel the intelligence in its design, the way it uses airflow, heat distribution, and deception all at once. You picture someone huddled here decades ago, carefully lighting a fire while bombs thundered above. It must have been both terrifying and absurd, cooking a meal in the middle of a war. Underground, with the ground shaking around you. Yet they did it, day after day. Your guide reaches into a crevice and pulls out something small, a rusted tin bowl. The edges dented but intact. He holds it up like an artifact. They shared everything: rice, salt, even air. You nod slowly. They must have lived on so little. Enough to keep going, he says simply. That's all they needed. You sit cross-legged on the dirt. The floor cool beneath your legs. The silence here is softer, almost comforting. You can imagine the sound of rice boiling, the quiet chatter, the soft clinking of spoons. Life in miniature. And suddenly, you realize, this wasn't just a kitchen. It was a symbol of resistance. Every meal cooked here was a declaration. We are still alive. Sometimes, your guide adds, they cooked for hundreds. The smoke tunnels branched out like veins. Whole underground villages shared meals this way. You imagine it, steam rising through the soil, spreading warmth and defiance beneath the jungle. Above ground, the forest would have looked perfectly still. The Americans might have thought the area deserted. Meanwhile, under their boots, dinner was being served. You smile at the absurd beauty of it. They made the earth their oven. Your guide grins, and their shield. He points toward a narrow shaft leading upward. That's the ventilation path. Try sticking your hand near it. You do, and to your surprise, there's a faint breeze, warm air drifting up, the ghosts of old fires. You close your eyes for a moment and almost hear the past, the crackle of wood, the murmured voices, someone laughing quietly. Then your guide says, sometimes, during heavy bombing, they couldn't cook at all. The air pressure would push smoke back down. So they waited, hungry, silent, breathing heat and fear. You open your eyes. How did they endure that? He shrugs. They had no choice. There's that phrase again. You've heard it more than once since you entered these tunnels. It's not resignation, it's truth. You look around again, and your light catches something carved into the wall, a small drawing. Barely visible. A bird, maybe, wings outstretched. The lines are crude but careful. You reach out and trace it gently. Someone drew that while waiting. Your guide says, maybe dreaming of open sky. It hits you, the crushing irony. Down here, in this stifling dark, someone still imagined flight. Your guide motions for you to follow him again. You crawl through another narrow passage. Your knees scraping clay, your back aching. The smell of soot fades behind you. The air shifts, cooler now, tinged with dampness. Next, he says, you'll see how they disappeared. Disappeared? You ask, half joking, like magic? He chuckles softly. Better than magic. They made themselves invisible. You keep crawling, your mind still stuck on the kitchen, that strange, sacred place where people boiled rice in the dark and fooled the sky. As you move, your flashlight flickers again, casting long shadows that dance on the tunnel walls. You think about how this network wasn't just a military base. It was a mirror of the people who built it. Clever, patient, unyielding. Each tunnel, each vent, each secret passage is a reminder that survival is an art form. Not loud, not glorious, quiet, calculated, persistent. You duck under a low arch, your breath echoing softly, and catch the faint sound of dripping water somewhere ahead. Your guide doesn't look back, but his voice drifts through the dark. You see, he says, up there, they had machines. Down here, we had time. You can't help but smile in the dark. Because that's it, isn't it? Time. The tunnels weren't built to win quickly. They were built to endure. And as you move deeper, the smell of smoke fades completely, replaced by the damp scent of earth, cool, eternal, unbothered. You whisper to yourself, cooking without smoke, living without light, how did they do it? The tunnel seems to whisper back, because they had to. You're starting to lose track of direction. Every tunnel looks the same now, narrow, dark, and endless. The air grows denser with each breath, and your flashlight beam trembles slightly from your hand's fatigue. Somewhere above, the world must still be bright and loud. But down here, time feels suspended. Your guide finally stops and crouches, gesturing for you to listen. You freeze, holding your breath. At first, there's only silence. Then, faintly, the sound of something moving in the distance. Footsteps, light, deliberate. You can't see them, but you can feel them through the earth. Vibrations so subtle they travel along your skin. Back then, your guide whispers, you wouldn't see them either. That's how they fought. You realize he's talking about the tunnel soldiers, the invisible ones. They were called Doi Du Kich Dia Dao, the underground guerrillas. The invisible soldiers who slipped between worlds, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. While armies searched from the sky, these people moved silently beneath their feet, unseen, unpredictable. The guide's voice drops to a murmur. They'd wait for night, crawl out through hidden exits, attack, and vanish again before dawn. The Americans never knew where they went. You try to imagine it, surfacing from the soil like a shadow, striking swiftly, then melting back into the earth before anyone could react. It's almost mythic, like something out of folklore. But it happened, night after night. The enemy called them ghosts. Your guide continues, we called them brothers. You crawl forward again, your flashlight catching the faint shimmer of something metallic in the dirt. A fragment of a belt buckle. Maybe a relic of someone who once vanished into this underground world and never returned. The deeper you go, the more the tunnels seem alive. The earth doesn't just surround you, it hums with memory. You can almost hear it, the shuffle of bare feet, the murmur of plans whispered in darkness, the quiet laughter between comrades who knew that sound was both comfort and danger. You pass a narrow alcove, and your guide pauses. This, he says, was a listening post. They dug small chambers like this near the surface to hear movement above. Every vibration mattered, footsteps, vehicles, even planes. You crouch inside and close your eyes. The silence feels thick, pressing against your eardrums until you can hear your own heartbeat. For a moment, you understand what it meant to live by sound. In this world, noise was language, and silence was survival. They could tell American patrols apart by how they walked. The guide adds softly, "Boots are heavier than sandals. Even fear sounds different." You open your eyes again and find that sentence lingers in your chest. Even fear sounds different. You crawl onward, your palms damp against the packed soil. The tunnels twist and slope gently upward, and your flashlight beam catches the faint glint of moisture, condensation clinging to the walls like sweat. Sometimes, your guide says, they would stay underground for weeks. They'd listen, wait, and only move when the ground stopped shaking from bombs. You nod silently. You can almost feel those vibrations now. Phantom tremors from a war that ended decades ago but still breathes faintly through the soil. American soldiers hated the tunnels. Your guide says after a while. They called them the Black Maze. Some refused to enter at all. The ones who did, well, they were called tunnel rats. Brave men, but most didn't come back the same. You know the stories. Men crawling through the dark with flashlights and pistols, searching for enemies who were practically invisible. Sometimes they'd hear whispers, or a single cough, or the metallic click of a trap. They said the fear down here felt different, thicker, personal. And it wasn't one-sided. For the guerrillas too, fear was constant. The kind that becomes part of your bloodstream. But fear wasn't their master. It was their compass. Your guide stops suddenly. "Watch your head," he says, ducking under a low beam. You follow, brushing against rough wood. These supports held up the tunnels through monsoon seasons. Floods could destroy everything, so they learned to build fast, repair faster. You smile faintly, amazed again at the quiet genius behind every inch of this place. Invisible soldiers, invisible architects. He chuckles softly. Same people. You keep moving, the passage bending sharply left. The air cools as you approach another small chamber. This one is filled with silence so profound it feels holy. This was a resting point. Your guide whispers. Sometimes soldiers slept here between missions. Sometimes they hid for days. Just listening. You shine your light and see faint marks on the walls, scratches. Initials, maybe even drawings, half erased by time. The ghosts of men who once shared jokes in the dark. Laughed softly. Dreamed of daylight. You whisper without thinking, "Did they ever see the sun?" "Not often," your guide replies. "They learned to live without it. Some said they forgot what it felt like." You look at the wall again. The worn marks now taking shape, a crude outline of a person holding a rifle. Maybe drawn by someone young, barely old enough to fight. Someone who found a way to be remembered, even in the dark. The realization hits you. These tunnels aren't graves. They're testimonies. Every scratch, every nail, every breath still trapped in the clay is a line of poetry written by people who refused to vanish. You sit back, your head nearly touching the ceiling. And for a brief moment, you feel as if you can hear them, a chorus of whispers. Countless voices saying the same thing. We were here. You take one slow breath. The air tastes like dust and memory. Your guide breaks the silence. Ready to see what shared the tunnels with them? You raise an eyebrow. Shared? He grins faintly. The kind of grin that says you won't like the answer. Yes, he says. Not all the inhabitants down here were human. You blink, uncertain whether he's joking, but when he gestures toward the next tunnel, one darker, narrower, and somehow alive with sound. You realize he's perfectly serious. You follow him, crawling toward the strange noises echoing from the darkness ahead, the tiny scratching, the fluttering, the living heartbeat of the underground jungle. And as the smell changes from soiled to something damp and wild, you understand. Surviving the tunnels didn't just mean enduring the war. It meant coexisting with everything else that called this darkness home. The noise grows clearer as you crawl deeper, the scratching of tiny claws against clay, the faint flutter of wings, and something else, a low squeak that seems to echo from everywhere at once. The smell hits next, sharp, musky, undeniably alive. You stop. Please tell me that's not what I think it is. You whisper. Your guide laughs quietly. Rats, he says, and bats, and sometimes snakes. You get used to them. You can't help the nervous chuckle that escapes your throat. I'm pretty sure I'd never get used to that. He shrugs. That's why you wouldn't survive down here. You edge forward reluctantly. The tunnel feels different now. More organic, as if the creatures themselves have reshaped it over time. You shine your flashlight ahead, and sure enough, two small eyes glint back at you, motionless for a second before darting away. You flinch instinctively, your hand scraping the dirt wall. During the war, your guide continues, his voice low and calm. The tunnels were full of life. The soldiers shared space with animals. Whether they liked it or not, bats made homes in the ceilings. Rats gnawed through food stores. Snakes slithered in from the rice fields. You grimace. That sounds like a nightmare. He chuckles softly. For you, maybe. For them, it was just another day. You crawl slowly, feeling the heat rise from the ground. The smell of earth is thick, mixed with something sour, decay, perhaps, or the lingering remains of old food stores. Didn't they ever clean? You ask. They did, your guide replies, but there was only so much they could do. Hygiene was a luxury. They fought infection with herbs, slept beside rats, and prayed the snakes stayed hungry for someone else. You try to imagine that, lying awake in total darkness, listening to tiny feet scurrying inches away from your face. You shiver. That's worse than bombs. Bombs you can run from. He says simply. These, you learn to ignore. You pause at a low archway and watch a single bat flutter past your face. Its wings a whisper in the air. You duck instinctively. The guide laughs again. They used to say if you could sleep through the bats, you could sleep through anything. The words linger in your mind. Sleep through anything. That was the measure of endurance down here, not bravery, not violence, but adaptability. To live in the dark meant learning to let fear become part of the routine. Some of the soldiers treated the animals like warnings. Your guide continues. If the bats flew suddenly, it meant vibrations from bombs above. If the rats fled, gas was coming. You blink. So even the wildlife became part of their defense system? He nods. Everything did. The earth, the trees, the animals, all allies. You move forward again, and your hand brushes something wet. You jerk back, shining your light to reveal a trickle of muddy water running along the floor. Flooding? Yes, he says. During the monsoons, the tunnels filled with water. They'd sit in the dark for hours, sometimes days, with water up to their chests. The animals climbed above them. People stayed still. breathing slowly, waiting for the rain to stop. You try to picture it, an entire community submerged in silence. The sound of rain pounding the world above while they sat half drowned in the dark. It's almost impossible to comprehend. They built drainage systems, your guide adds, but even that wasn't always enough. The tunnels flooded anyway. People died quietly down here. Others dug them out later and kept going. The matter-of-fact tone in his voice chills you more than the air. He's not dramatizing it. He's simply stating a fact, the way you might describe the weather. You crawl onward, your body aching, your palms slick with sweat and clay. You can't tell what's worse, the confinement or the knowledge of what once lived here. A sudden flutter near your head makes you flinch again. This time you catch a glimpse, a small bat, hanging upside down from the low ceiling, its body trembling slightly as it breathes. You stare at it, and something about its stillness feels familiar. It's surviving, just like the people did, quiet, hidden, efficient. Some say, the guide murmurs behind you, that the tunnels breathed through these creatures. They were like guardians, keeping the balance. You laugh softly, half out of nerves, half in wonder. Guardians? Of rats and bats? He smiles. Of life. Life that refuses to disappear. You crawl forward until the tunnel opens again into a small chamber. This one smells cleaner, cooler. The walls are smooth, the floor slightly sloped. Water drips rhythmically from the ceiling. It's oddly peaceful. Water chamber, the guide explains, sometimes used to collect rainwater, sometimes used to hide from gas attacks. When the enemy released gas, they'd flood this section and breathe through bamboo tubes. You frown. That actually worked? Most of the time, he says. Sometimes the water saved them. Sometimes it didn't. You sit back on your heels, your flashlight beam glinting on the rippling puddle before you. The sound of water echoes softly. Hypnotic. The tunnel feels almost like a living creature, breathing, sweating, dreaming. You take a slow breath and whisper, "They lived through all this?" The guide nods. For years, some children grew up knowing nothing else. You feel the weight of that settle into you, the idea of a generation raised in darkness. Sharing space with creatures of the night, learning that silence could be safer than sunlight. The bat stirs again, its wings brushing the air like pages turning. You tilt your head, almost smiling now. You know. You say softly, maybe they weren't alone after all. Your guide looks at you and nods. No one ever really is. Down here. You sit for a long moment, letting the quiet pulse of life sink in, human and otherwise. The line between them feels blurred, as if the tunnels taught everyone, man and animal alike, how to adapt to darkness. Then your guide rises and gestures toward another corridor. Come, he says, you've heard what lives here. Now it's time to hear what the earth itself sounded like during the bombing. You hesitate, listening to the fading squeaks and wings behind you. Then you follow him, crawling once more into the beating heart of the underground world, toward the echoes of thunder that once shook the soil itself. You crawl after your guide, and the air changes again, heavier now. But strangely still, the silence feels different here, deeper, as though it's waiting for something. Stop for a moment, your guide whispers, listen. You hold still, letting the darkness settle around you. At first, there's nothing but your heartbeat. Then it comes, a faint, low rumble from above. You almost mistake it for thunder. But it's too metallic, too deliberate. Bombs, he says quietly. That's what it used to sound like. The sound isn't loud, more memory than noise, but even the echo of it sends a tremor down your spine. You imagine the earth shaking, dust falling from the ceiling, lights flickering out. When they bombed, your guide continues, people here didn't scream or panic. They just waited. They knew if they screamed, the air would run out faster. You glance up at the ceiling. Just a thin layer of packed soil between you and the ghost of that old violence. It's hard to believe how close death must have been, mere feet of earth away. Sometimes, he adds, the tunnels collapsed. Sometimes the oxygen disappeared, but they had vents, small ones, hidden under leaves, shaped like termite mounds. They kept everyone breathing. You try to picture it, explosions pounding above, while below, a few small holes in the ground were the difference between life and suffocation. He gestures to a thin shaft carved into the wall. That's one of them, still works, after all these years. You crouch closer. The shaft is no wider than your wrist. Lined with clay, you feel a faint draft, the earth breathing. You see, he says, the trick was to make the air move without letting the smoke or light escape. They used bends, curves, and hidden outlets. The Americans tried everything. They poured gas, water, even fire down the vents. But the system was smarter than it looked. You run your fingers along the edge of the vent. It's smooth, cold. The design feels instinctive, as if it grew rather than was built. Some engineers later studied these tunnels. Your guide continues. They said the ventilation was too efficient to be primitive. But it was just observation. The builders watched how the land breathed, how wind moved through roots and cracks. They copied nature. You let out a quiet, amazed laugh. Nature as a blueprint. He nods. And necessity as an architect. The next rumble from above is louder, not real. Just the echo of imagination, and you flinch before realizing it. The guide notices. You feel it, don't you? The pressure? You nod slowly. It's like the air's pushing back. Exactly. When bombs hit, the shock waves traveled through the ground. They couldn't stop them, but they learned how to survive them. How? He smiles faintly. They built curves. You raise an eyebrow. Curves? Yes. Straight tunnels collapse under pressure. Curved ones flex. The force spreads instead of breaking. They built everything curved, ceilings, corridors, even doors. It made the tunnels breathe instead of break. You take that in, and suddenly you notice. Every tunnel you've crawled through has a gentle curve. Nothing here is straight. It's as if the earth itself learned to move with the blows. You whisper, "That's brilliant." He nods again. When the world above tried to crush them, they bent instead of breaking. That's how they lived. You let that line hang in the air. They bent instead of breaking. It feels like a philosophy, not just architecture. As you move on, you feel a strange vibration beneath your palms. The guide turns off his flashlight. You freeze, disoriented in sudden darkness. Then you feel it again, the faint tremor of the ground. Like a slow heartbeat. "What's that?" you whisper. "Back then, bombs," he says softly. "Now, just trucks on the road above. But the sound, it's the same." You realize then that the earth doesn't forget. It remembers rhythm, impact, vibration, all the ways humans have tried to break it. He switches the light back on. And you exhale slowly, your breath echoing in the narrow space. So they lived like this for years? You ask. Yes, he replies. And not just soldiers, families. Women, children, the elderly. Some were born down here. Others died down here. When bombs fell, people didn't run away from the earth. They ran into it. You can't help but whisper. That's both horrifying and poetic. He smiles. That's history. You keep crawling until the tunnel opens into another chamber. This one is larger. And on the far wall, you spot black streaks, soot marks trailing upward. Cooking smoke, he says, answering your thought. Even the bombs couldn't stop dinner. You laugh quietly, shaking your head. They really cooked through air raids? He shrugs. You can't fight on an empty stomach. There's a pause, a comfortable silence that feels like respect. You sit for a moment, listening. The air hums faintly, like a memory of thunder still traveling through the ground. Then, softly, the guide says, some people said they could tell which plane was coming just by the vibration. B-52s, Phantoms, Skyraiders, each had its own song. You look at him. They memorized the sound of war? He nods. You would too, if your life depended on it. Some historians still argue about whether that's possible. But the people here didn't argue. They just listened. The way he says it sends a chill through you. There's something both eerie and beautiful about that. Humans becoming part of the landscape. Attuned to every sound, every tremor. The next few minutes pass in silence. You feel the walls again, cool, solid, alive. You imagine sitting here decades ago. Surrounded by fear but rooted in calm. The sound of bombs above. The breath of life below. Finally, your guide stands, ready to see where they healed? You blink. Healed? He nods toward another passage, lower. Darker. The air tinged with something metallic. The hospitals, he says. No sunlight. No anesthesia. Just courage. You hesitate, glancing once more at the curved walls that once flexed under fire. Then you take a breath and follow him down, toward the part of the tunnels where pain met endurance. And humanity tried its best to patch itself back together in the dark. The tunnel narrows again, and you move slower now. Your muscles protesting with every push forward. The air feels heavier than before, stale, humid, like the breath of something ancient. When the guide stops and raises his hand, you freeze instinctively. This, he whispers, is where they listened. You tilt your head, but there's nothing at first, just the familiar stillness of buried earth. Then, as your breathing steadies, you start to hear it. Faint vibrations, subtle as heartbeat pulses, moving through the ground. They called it listening to the earth. The guide continues, a skill, a necessity. When the war moved above, they could hear everything, soldiers walking, tanks rolling, planes preparing to drop bombs. You press your ear against the cool wall. The clay hums faintly. The sound is alive, but soft, like thunder heard from miles away. It's strange, you whisper. It feels alive. The guide nods. It was their radar. The soil carried every sound. If you knew how to hear it, they could even tell direction by the way the vibrations rolled through the ground. You try to imagine it. The world above alive with violence, helicopters slicing the air. Explosions blooming while below. People pressed their ears to the dirt, reading tremors like messages. They built small chambers like this. He explains, gesturing around the dimly lit space. Listening posts. Usually just one or two people inside. They'd stay here for hours. Still as statues. What did they do if they heard something, you ask? They tapped a signal, he says. 2 short knocks for danger. 3 for safe. No words. No shouting. The sound carried farther through the tunnels than voices ever could. You rest your hand on the wall again, as if you might feel an echo from the past, the gentle rhythm of warning. Survival encoded in sound. They say, the guide adds, that after a while, some could even tell when it was raining above, by the pitch of the vibrations. You smile faintly. That's almost supernatural. He shrugs. When you live in the dark long enough, the impossible becomes practical. You notice a faint glimmer on the floor, a small pool of water reflecting your light. The ripples dance gently, disturbed by the movement of air through unseen vents. That's beautiful, you say. It saved lives. He replies. Water amplified sound. They'd use puddles like mirrors to watch the surface shake when footsteps passed above. No need for sight when the earth itself told you who was coming. The simplicity of it humbles you. No gadgets, no screens, just patience, observation, and trust in the natural world. Your guide crouches beside you, pressing his palm against the ground. Sometimes, when bombs fell too close, they could feel it through their hands before they heard it. The ground shuddered. That's how they knew when to brace. You mimic him, flattening your palm against the floor. The sensation is subtle but real, the weight of the world pressing through your skin. You whisper, it's like the earth remembers everything. He nods slowly. It does, especially pain. You sit back, resting against the dirt wall. Your flashlight flickers slightly, and for a moment, the shadows seem to move, like faint silhouettes of people kneeling. Listening, waiting. Your guide breaks the silence with a quiet story. One woman, she worked here. In this very tunnel, she was deaf in one ear. But she could sense vibrations better than anyone else. They said she once predicted a bombing raid half an hour before it began. No one believed her, until the ground started shaking. You raise an eyebrow. How did she know? He smiles faintly. She said the earth told her. Some things don't need translation. You both sit there for a while. In the hum of the underground quiet, you can hear faint trickles of water. The soft movement of air through the vents. Somewhere far away, the echo of a distant rumble, modern life above. A ghost of the old chaos below. You murmur, the Americans must have hated this, fighting an enemy they couldn't see or hear. They did, he says simply. They dropped explosives, sent gas, even flooded the tunnels. But the more they tried to destroy them, the deeper the tunnels grew. It was a war of patience, sound versus silence. You think about that for a moment. The contrast is striking, one side with machines and thunder, the other with whispers and earth. Yet somehow, the quiet one. Your guide leans back, sighing softly. When I was a boy, he says, my grandfather told me he used to sleep near one of these chambers. He said the sound of the earth comforted him. It made him feel less alone. You smile. Even in war? He nods. Especially in war. Something in that line lingers in you. You realize that survival here wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The tunnels weren't only shelters. They were sanctuaries. The walls didn't just block bombs, they absorbed fear. After a while, the guide stands, brushing dirt from his knees. Come, you've heard the ground speak. Now you'll see what it said to the people above, through those who went to deliver its message. You tilt your head. You mean the messengers again? He shakes his head. No, the enemies. The ones who tried to follow the sound, and found the darkness instead. You glance down the corridor ahead. It's narrower, the air thicker, as if even the earth wants to keep its secrets. You take one last look around the listening post, this tiny, humble space where silence once defeated technology, and whisper. The earth was their ally. The guide smiles, and their teacher. Then he turns, ducking into the next passage, his flashlight disappearing into the dark. You follow, crawling once more through the living veins of history, toward the next echo of a war that was fought not just in fire and blood, but in patience, sound, and silence. You follow your guide through another low corridor, one that feels different from the rest. The air is cooler, but heavier, like you've crossed into a place where even the ground doesn't want to be disturbed. Your flashlight cuts through the dark and reveals something strange. Marks on the walls. Faint black streaks that curve and twist. Careful, the guide murmurs. Watch your step. The ground here is uneven, dotted with small pits and stones. As your light moves forward, you realize the marks on the wall aren't random, they're drawings. Simple, hurried outlines of faces, some smiling, some not. These were the people who lived here, he says, but they weren't soldiers. You look closer. The figures are smaller, their bodies thin, their hands holding objects, books, baskets, lanterns. Families, you ask? He nods. The ones who made this place livable. You hadn't really thought about that. It's easy to picture the tunnels as a military zone, fighters, maps, guns, but not as a home. Yet here, the drawings tell another story, one of dinners shared in silence, of lullabies whispered to children under the hum of bombers. Even here, your guide says softly, they found time to live. You crawl farther into the chamber and realize it's bigger than you expected. Several narrow alcoves branch from the main passage, each one small enough for only one or two people. He points toward one of them. Sleeping quarters. Families used mats of dried grass or banana leaves. Sometimes they slept sitting up, so they could move faster if the alarm sounded. You glance inside one of the alcoves. It's empty now, just a hollow in the earth. But there's something haunting about it, the curve of the walls. Smoothed by human touch, the faint indentation where someone's back once rested. They didn't just hide, the guide continues. They worked, cooked, studied, even loved. You raise your eyebrows. Loved? Down here? He chuckles quietly. War doesn't stop the heart. Only the body. Couples married underground. There are stories of children being born right here. Between bomb raids, midwives would use the same lamps as the doctors. You can't help but smile at the image. Love stories beneath a war zone. Humanity, stubborn and quiet, blooming in the dark. Didn't they get scared? You ask. Always, he says, But fear became routine. They made games for the children to distract them, guessing which vibration came from rain and which came from bombs. They told stories, sang songs, anything to remind themselves that the world above wasn't gone. You picture it vividly now, children giggling softly in a tunnel corner. Mothers whispering lullabies, fathers listening for footsteps overhead. The contrast is surreal, innocence and terror sharing the same breath. One wall catches your eye. There's a faint inscription, carved deeper than the rest. We sleep under the earth, but dream of the sky. You run your fingers over the words. The letters are uneven, carved in haste, but they feel deliberate. You can almost sense the person who wrote them, someone tired, hopeful, and still dreaming. That's beautiful, you say quietly. The guide nods. Hope is the one thing you can't bury. He crouches near a small pile of stones in the corner. As he brushes them aside, you see something half buried, a thin metal object, shaped like a locket. He picks it up, wipes away the dirt, and opens it carefully. Inside is a tiny, faded photograph. A young couple, smiling awkwardly. The kind of smile meant to survive separation. Found this last year, he says. We leave it here. Some things belong to the tunnels now. You both sit in silence for a moment, the air thick with memory. It's strange, you say. Up there, war stories are all explosions and victories. Down here, it's just life. Exactly, he says. The real war was patience. Survival wasn't a single act, it was 1,000 small ones. You shine your light on another corner. There's a broken clay bowl, a few rusted utensils, and what looks like a string of beads. They glint faintly in the dim light. Simple yet precious. Offerings, he explains. After the war, some families came back and left gifts. Food, jewelry, incense, for those who never came home. You nod quietly, unsure what to say. The silence here doesn't feel empty, it feels full. After a while, he gestures toward another tunnel leading deeper. This way, you've seen how they lived. Now you'll see how they endured the waiting. The waiting? You ask. He looks at you, eyes steady. When the world above stopped moving, but time below didn't. You glance back one more time at the faint carvings of faces on the wall. The locket resting in the dust. The small inscription about dreaming of the sky. Every inch of this place feels alive with memory. Heavy with love and fear pressed into the same soil. As you crawl onward, the air feels warmer again. The sound of your breath echoes softly, rhythmic, like a lullaby sung to the past. You realize the deeper you go, the more you're beginning to understand. This wasn't a story about hiding, it was a story about persistence. And as the tunnel curves ahead into darkness, your guide says, almost in a whisper, even underground, people found a way to feel the sun. You smile faintly. How? He glances back. You'll see. Then he disappears into the next tunnel, his light flickering ahead, and you follow, still half in awe, half in disbelief that a place built for war could hold so much of what makes people human. The tunnel ahead grows quieter the deeper you go, as if even the soil knows to hush. The air cools, thin and damp, carrying the faint scent of rust and roots. You can almost taste time here, thick, metallic, unmoving. Your guide moves slowly now, almost reverently. This is where the waiting happened, he murmurs. You glance around. The space is different, larger, flatter, built for stillness rather than work. The ceiling arches low, and the floor is smooth and compact, worn by countless bodies sitting in silence. Waiting for what? You ask. For everything, he says. For messages, for supplies, for the bombing to stop, for the war to end. You take a few careful steps forward. There's a strange, fragile peace in this place. The kind that comes not from safety, but from exhaustion. This was the hardest part. Your guide continues. Not the fighting, the waiting, days without sound from above. No idea if the world still existed. You can almost feel it, the weight of hours stacked on hours, marked only by the slow drip of condensation and the faint shuffle of tired limbs. No clocks, no daylight, only heartbeat and breath. How did they keep track of time? You ask softly. They didn't, he replies. They marked days by hunger, by songs, by stories. When there was nothing to do, they talked. You picture it. Men and women sitting in this same chamber, whispering stories into the dark, some true, some invented, anything to remind themselves they were still alive. Sometimes, the guide says, they'd tell each other what they'd do after the war, what they'd eat, where they'd go, whose names they'd call out first. You smile faintly. Dreams in the dark. He nods. It kept them human. You notice shallow indentations in the wall, marks from fingertips pressed into the clay. Some deep, some barely visible. Were those made while waiting too? Yes, he says. Some carved poems. Some just pressed their hands there when they prayed. Others left marks to count the days. You run your fingers over one of the prints. It's small, too small to belong to a soldier. A child, you whisper. He nods again. There were many. They grew up in the tunnels. Learned to walk here, to speak here. They thought the outside world was only noise and light. You fall silent. You can't imagine growing up without a sky, without color, without sound beyond whispers and explosions. Some say, the guide adds, the waiting changed them. They learned to listen differently, to move quietly, to slow their breathing. The earth became part of them. You turn your flashlight to the far corner and see a small wooden box resting against the wall. Inside are pebbles, round, smooth, arranged in a neat line. They used stones to mark the days. He explains, one stone for each sunrise they didn't see. You pick one up, rolling it between your fingers. It's cold and heavy. You set it back down gently. This must have been unbearable. He gives a faint smile. It was, and yet, they endured. You sit on the floor beside him. The dirt cool beneath you. Did they ever lose hope? Of course, he says, but even hopelessness becomes a kind of rhythm. They survived by routine. Cook, dig, wait, repair, sleep, then do it again. When life shrinks that small, you stop dreaming of victory. You just dream of morning. You look at him for a long moment. Did they know they'd win? No one does, he says quietly, but they believed they'd outlast. That word, outlast, echoes in your head. It doesn't sound triumphant. It sounds patient, ancient. He gestures toward a small tunnel branching upward. That one led to the surface. When the bombing stopped, a scout would climb up, check the sky, listen. Sometimes it was safe, sometimes it wasn't, so they'd wait again. You glance toward the opening. It's barely wider than a man's shoulders, lined with old timber and bamboo roots. You can almost see someone's hands gripping the edge, dirt crumbling under their nails as they tried to see daylight. Didn't they ever panic? You ask. He chuckles softly. Every day. But fear loses its sharpness when it becomes routine. They joked about it, said the tunnels made them immune to surprise. Did they laugh often? He nods. More than you'd think. The smaller the space, the louder the laughter. You smile. Maybe laughter was rebellion. Exactly, he says. It was how they reminded the darkness it hadn't won. You both sit there for a while. The silence almost comforting. The air hums faintly, as if remembering the countless breaths once drawn in this same place. When you finally speak, your voice sounds different, softer, steadier. It feels like this room remembers the sound of waiting. He looks at you, eyes reflecting the faint light. It does. Every wall down here remembers something. Every echo belongs to someone who hoped the war would end before their patience did. You nod, unable to find words. The guide stands, brushing off his hands. Come, the waiting always leads somewhere. For them, it led upward. Upward? He smiles. To the day they finally saw the sky again. You follow him toward the narrow passage rising ahead. The slope steep but promising. The air feels different here, lighter. As if sunlight itself is waiting just beyond reach. As you crawl, you whisper to yourself, half a prayer, half a promise. If they could wait for years in the dark. I can endure a few more meters to the light. The passage angles upward now. A slow ascent that makes your arms ache and your breath shallow. The air feels fresher somehow, touched by faint hints of grass and sunlight filtered through layers of soil. You glance back. The tunnel behind you is a black vein. Silent and endless. Ahead, the earth begins to brighten. Your guide's voice echoes softly. This part was for escape and illusion. Illusion? You ask, crawling closer. He nods, shining his light on the wall. The art of disappearing. The words sound almost magical. But the explanation that follows is anything but. They built false tunnels, dozens of them. Dead ends, hidden doors, fake ventilation shafts. To confuse enemies who thought they'd found the real entrance. You reach a section where the floor suddenly dips into a pit barely a meter wide. At first glance, it looks like the tunnel continues below, but when you shine your light deeper, you realize it's a trick. A false floor covered by a thin layer of bamboo. They'd fall through that? You ask. Sometimes, he says, the ones who weren't supposed to be here. It's a strange feeling, to know that every corner of this world was once designed for deception. Even the air itself seems conspiratorial. You move carefully, tracing the walls with your hand. The dirt is smoother here, pressed tight and reinforced with hidden bamboo frames. So the tunnels weren't just shelters. They were traps. Traps, he confirms. Mirages, disguises, survival through confusion. He crawls ahead, pushing open what looks like solid wall. To your surprise, it swings aside, revealing another narrow corridor. The wall is just a wooden hatch coated with clay. Perfectly camouflaged. You can't even see the seam once he lets it close again. They could vanish in seconds. He says, whole units disappeared right under American patrols. Even dogs lost the scent. You follow him through the hidden door. The air now cooler again. Every sound feels amplified, the scrape of your palms, the faint rasp of breath. How did they remember all the routes, you ask? They didn't, he says, grinning slightly. They felt them. Everyone had their own section memorized. If you woke a soldier at midnight, he could tell you which tunnel led to food, which led to danger, which led to the surface. They learned the underground the way others learn constellations. You smile. Star maps in dirt. Exactly, he says. Only here, the stars were traps, exits, and hope. You reach a chamber barely big enough for the two of you to crouch in. The guide lifts a wooden panel in the ceiling, and daylight, real daylight, spills down like a ghost. You blink hard, your eyes adjusting to the faint, dusty beam. This, he whispers, was an exit, one of hundreds. You look up and see a narrow shaft lined with bamboo. At the top, faint cracks of green and gold hint at grass and sunlight. Your heartbeat quickens. They came out here? Sometimes, he says, but rarely. The exits changed often. Every time the enemy found one, they closed it and dug another. It was like chasing shadows. He gestures toward the shaft. Climb if you want. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. You grip the bamboo supports and begin to climb. The wood creaks under your hands. The air grows lighter, warmer. When you're close enough, you can smell grass, smoke, and the faint sweetness of sunlight after rain. Then your head breaks through the surface. The first thing that hits you is color. After hours in the tunnels, the world above feels almost unreal. The greens are too bright, the sky too wide, the sounds too loud, the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, the distant chatter of people. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with fresh air. It feels heavy with life. Imagine, your guide says from below, coming up after weeks in the dark. The light would hurt your eyes. The air would feel like water. You glance around. The exit is hidden beneath a small mound covered with grass and leaves. From a few steps away, it would be invisible. You could walk right past it. You say. Many did, he replies. That's why they survived. You crouch near the opening, staring at the ground. So they lived their whole lives right under this? Yes, he says softly. You could be drinking tea above them, and they'd be right under your feet, listening, waiting, planning. You think about that for a moment, the duality of it all. The surface world full of sun and color. And beneath it, a hidden civilization carved by persistence. He gestures for you to climb back down. We're not done yet, he says. You descend slowly, the light shrinking above you until it becomes a small golden circle. Then vanishes completely. The darkness returns, familiar now, almost comforting. Back in the chamber, your guide brushes the dirt from his sleeves. They called this the art of disappearing, but it was also the art of patience. They didn't run from danger. They dissolved into the earth until danger passed. You nod. They turned the ground into armor. He smiles faintly. And into identity. Even after the war, people still said, we came from the tunnels. It wasn't shame. It was pride. You sit in silence, thinking about the invisible lives that once passed through these corridors, the laughter, the fear, the cleverness born of necessity. Finally, your guide speaks again. There's one more thing to see before we reach the end of the network. The tunnels protected them from bombs and bullets. Yes, but they couldn't protect them from hunger, sickness, or the weight of years. That's where endurance became something more than survival. You exhale slowly, the air cool on your lips. Endurance, you repeat, the hardest art of all. He nods. Exactly. Come, let's go see how they endured. You take one last glance at the hidden shaft above, the sunlight fading back into memory. Then crawl once more into the deeper dark, where light was a rumor. And endurance was a way of life. The air thickens again as you move deeper. And soon the sound of your own breathing fills the silence. The tunnels narrow, twist, and dip, as if the earth itself is testing your resolve. You follow the dim glow of the guide's flashlight, your palms slick with sweat, your knees scraping against damp clay. After what feels like hours, the passage widens into a chamber that smells faintly of old wood, salt, and decay. There are remains of wooden beams propping up the ceiling, a few broken baskets, and the ghosts of what might once have been shelves. This, your guide says softly, was the storage level: food, medicine, tools, everything they needed to keep living when there was nothing left above. You sweep your light across the walls. They're lined with small niches, like cubbyholes carved into the dirt. Inside, you see fragments, bits of pottery, dried husks of bamboo, the faint shimmer of rusted tin. Everything they had, he says, came from ingenuity. They preserved rice with salt and ash, caught rain through bamboo funnels, and stored drinking water in clay jars sealed with wax. Every drop mattered, every grain. You nod, awed by the quiet brilliance of it. How long could they live down here like this? He thinks for a moment. Weeks, sometimes months. It depended on the bombing. When the Americans dropped defoliants, there was nothing to harvest above, so they rationed. They traded sleep for hunger. You step closer to one of the alcoves. The dirt inside is dark, damp. What about medicine? He sighs. Mostly roots and herbs. Boiled bark for fever. Crushed leaves for infection. When that failed, faith. You glance at him. Faith in what? In endurance. He says simply. Faith that the body would obey the will. You can't help but admire that kind of strength, the quiet, invisible kind that doesn't make history books. He points to a set of narrow shelves carved from bamboo. Sometimes they stored weapons here too, rifles disassembled into pieces, grenades wrapped in cloth, ammunition sealed in wax to keep out moisture. You'd be surprised how much war fits into a hole in the ground. You chuckle softly, and all this was under people's feet. He nods. Under fields, schools, homes. The earth was both cradle and arsenal. Your flashlight catches something strange, a small hole in the floor. Just wide enough for a hand. What's that? He kneels beside it, a hidden compartment. Each storage chamber had one. They buried the most precious things, documents, medicine, sometimes letters. Letters? Yes, things they didn't want destroyed if the tunnel was bombed. We've found some over the years. Most unreadable now, but you can still make out words. Promises, mostly. You trace the edge of the hole with your fingers. What kind of promises? He looks at you, his expression softening, the kind people make when they don't know if they'll ever see daylight again. You feel a lump rise in your throat. That's heavy. He nods. War is always heavy, even underground. The two of you sit in silence for a while. The faint drip of water echoes through the chamber. Rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock that refuses to stop. You finally ask, didn't they get sick? Living in this heat, this damp? Oh, yes, he says quietly. Malaria, dysentery, infections. They fought more disease than bullets. But they didn't give up. They treated wounds with salt water, burns with leaves, fever with songs. Songs, you ask? He smiles faintly. There's a saying, if medicine doesn't work, sing louder. They believed songs kept the soul alive when the body couldn't keep up. You imagine it, sick and starving people whispering songs to each other in the dark. The melodies echoing off the walls like lifelines. It's haunting and beautiful all at once. You shift your light again and see another detail. Faint marks on the ceiling. Blackened and uneven. What's that? Smoke, he says. From lamps. They made them from empty bullet casings filled with animal fat and cotton. It gave just enough light to see your hands. Not enough to reveal your position to anyone above. You nod slowly. They turned everything into something else. That's what survival is, he says. Transformation. You both fall silent again. The air feels thicker here. Heavy with memory. You can almost sense the presence of those who once waited, prayed, sang, and starved in this same space. Finally, he says, you've seen how they lived. Now it's time to see how they came back to the surface. What happened when the light finally returned? Was it over then? You ask. He shakes his head. The war, yes, but the tunnels never ended. People came back to them after peace. Some to remember, some because they had nowhere else to go. The earth held their stories even after the guns stopped. You glance at the ceiling again, where faint sunlight seeps through cracks in the bamboo above. Dust motes drift lazily in the beam, tiny stars in an underground sky. You whisper, it feels alive. He smiles, it always was. You watch as he starts to crawl toward another passage, one that slopes gently upward, where the light grows brighter and the air warmer. Come, he says, you've felt the darkness. Now you'll feel the return to daylight, the first time they breathed freely again. You follow, your hands pressing into the soft, warm earth. The tunnel curves, and the beam of sunlight widens ahead. For the first time, you can smell grass again, wind, the outside world. And you realize something. After so much time below, even a small patch of sky feels infinite. The air changes first, no longer thick and stale but warm. Vibrant, carrying the scent of soil and leaves. You crawled toward it, heart pounding, the faint golden light ahead pulling you like gravity. Every inch feels like a climb from another world. When you finally emerge, you blink hard against the sun. It's dazzling, overwhelming, almost unreal after so much darkness. You squint, rubbing your eyes, the light carving sharp shapes into your vision, trees, grass, sky. The wind brushes your face, cool and fragrant with life. For a long moment, you just kneel there, half above ground, half below, suspended between two worlds. Your guide climbs out behind you and stretches, his voice calm but low. That first breath of air, he says, was everything. For them, it felt like being reborn. You inhale deeply. The air tastes different up here, less dense. Less old. I can't even imagine spending weeks down there. He smiles faintly. Some people forgot what the sky looked like. When they came up, the light hurt their eyes. They'd shield them with leaves. Just to adjust. You look around. The entrance is almost invisible from a few steps away, a small mound covered in brush and vines, blending perfectly with the jungle. You could have walked past it 1,000 times and never noticed. This exit was one of the last to be sealed. Your guide says they used it to escape when the war ended. But even then, they didn't trust the silence. For a while, no one believed it was really over. You stand slowly, stretching your legs, feeling the ground solid beneath your feet. The jungle hums softly around you, cicadas buzzing, leaves rustling, the distant call of a bird. The contrast is jarring. Down there, the world was still. Up here, it's alive, restless. Was it hard for them to adjust? You ask. Very, he says. Some couldn't sleep under open skies. Too much space, too much sound. The earth had been their roof for so long that freedom felt strange. You try to picture it, stepping into daylight, seeing endless sky, and feeling afraid instead of relieved. It's a kind of reverse claustrophobia. You think the world was suddenly too big. They had to learn how to live again. The guide continues to trust noise, to sleep without listening for bombs. You look down at your hands, still caked in dirt from crawling. I think I understand that. Down there, everything felt controlled. Up here, it's unpredictable. He nods. Exactly. The surface wasn't peace at first. It was confusion. You take a few steps away from the mound, the sunlight warming your skin. So what happened to the tunnels afterward? Some collapsed. Others became museums. A few were simply left alone, swallowed back by the jungle. He crouches and brushes away a leaf, revealing a small patch of old bamboo. But the people, the ones who lived there, they carried the tunnels with them. In their habits, their fears, their resilience, you can still see it in their faces if you visit the villages nearby. You look out toward the trees, imagining the people who once rose from these very holes, blinking into the sun, feeling the wind for the first time in months. They must have felt invincible. He shakes his head. Not invincible, just grateful. The word settles deep in your chest. Grateful. After everything, that's what remained. You sit down in the grass, gazing at the horizon. The jungle sways gently, green and endless. What did they do first? You ask quietly. When the bombing stopped, he says, they listened, then they sang. You turn to him. Sang? He smiles. The same songs they sang underground, but this time, louder. For the first time, no one needed to whisper. The image hits you hard. Men and women stepping out of holes in the earth, singing to the open sky. Their voices shaky from disuse but rising anyway. The jungle must have trembled with it. Decades of silence breaking all at once. You lie back in the grass, eyes half closed, listening to the wind move through the trees. The sound reminds you of those faint underground vibrations, the heartbeat of the earth, but now it's freer. Louder, alive. Your guide sits beside you. You see, he says, the tunnels weren't just a refuge. They were a promise that no matter how deep you have to go, there's always a way back to the light. You smile faintly. That's beautiful. He nods. They believed that even the darkest places can lead to dawn. You watch a bird swoop through the air, its wings flashing gold in the sun. For a moment, you understand exactly what he means. The world feels vast again. And yet, part of you misses the closeness of the dark, the way every breath and sound mattered. You realize the people who lived down there carried that awareness with them forever. Maybe that's what resilience really means, not just surviving the darkness, but learning to see differently when the light returns. You exhale slowly, feeling the earth beneath your back, solid and forgiving. Ready to keep going? Your guide asks. You turn your head toward him. Where to now? He points toward a faint path leading into the trees. Back to where the echoes live, the remnants, the memories, the stories left behind. You rise, brushing the dirt from your clothes one last time. The sun is warm, the air sweet with life. And for a fleeting second, you think you can hear faint voices beneath the ground, echoes of laughter, whispers of songs, the heartbeat of endurance. And you follow him onward, deeper into the sunlight, toward the last chapters of the underground world. You walk through the jungle now, soft earth underfoot, the light fractured through a canopy of leaves. The hum of cicadas fills the air. And yet, beneath that natural chorus, there's something else. The faint sense that the ground itself is still breathing. Even after the war ended, your guide says, walking ahead, the tunnels didn't go silent. They became something different, a memory made of soil. You follow him down a narrow path lined with tall grass and bamboo. The air is hot, but it feels lighter than before. He stops near a small clearing where the ground dips slightly, forming a shallow basin. Here, he says, was one of the largest entrances to the Kai network. It connected dozens of villages. You kneel and brush away the leaves. Beneath them, the earth is marked by faint outlines, traces of wood frames long since rotted away. You can still see the circular pattern where people once climbed in and out, vanishing into the earth. They filled most of them in. The guide continues, but you can still feel the shape of it. You see the trees? Their roots follow the tunnels underground. They've been feeding on history for 50 years. You glance around. The jungle feels dense and alive, but strangely quiet, like a cathedral without walls. Do people still come here? You ask. He nods. Veterans, families, students, some just to remember, others to understand. Understand what? He looks at you, then down at the soil. What endurance really costs. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of that sentence. The war ended long ago. Yet standing here, the ground still feels heavy with the stories buried beneath it. He kneels beside the old entrance, scooping a handful of soil and letting it fall through his fingers. This earth, he says, was mixed with blood, sweat, and rice husks. When it rained, it turned red. The tunnels changed color with the people who built them. You crouch beside him. Do you ever think the earth remembers everything that happened down there? He smiles faintly. It doesn't forget, but it forgives. That line stays with you for a long moment. You look around again, imagining what this place must have looked like decades ago, smoke rising from distant fires. The distant thunder of planes. The trembling ground hiding the quiet heartbeat of hundreds of lives below. He continues. When the war ended, some wanted to destroy the tunnels. Too many ghosts. too many memories, but others argued to keep them. They said the tunnels weren't just holes in the ground, they were proof. Proof that even in hell, people found a way to build something. You nod slowly. Proof that they endured. Yes, he says, endurance is the only true victory. The two of you stand there in silence for a while. The sunlight filters through the trees, scattering patterns across the ground. You can almost see shadows moving, faint shapes of people carrying rice. Laughing softly, disappearing into the earth. Sometimes, he says, at night, locals still say they hear tapping under the ground, like someone knocking softly from below. You glance at him, half smiling, half serious. You believe that? He shrugs. Maybe it's just the earth settling. Or maybe it's memory reminding us it's still here. The idea gives you chills. But not fear, more like reverence. The thought that even after everything, the tunnels might still hum with the pulse of the people who lived within them. You start walking again, following the guide toward another clearing. As you move, he points out small mounds of soil, barely visible, scattered like freckles across the landscape. Those, he says, are old air vents, hidden under termite mounds. They still breathe when the wind blows. You crouch beside one, pressing your hand to it. There's no sound, no movement, yet somehow you can feel it, the ghost of air that once carried the smell of cooking rice. The whispers of laughter, the faint murmur of life buried deep below. You look up. The sky is bright and endless. It feels too large, too unguarded. How did they come back to this? You ask. It wasn't easy, he says. For years, many still preferred the tunnels. They said it felt safer underground. Up here, the silence felt wrong, too exposed, too fragile. But eventually, they learned to live in the light again. You stare at the horizon, the jungle stretching endlessly. Maybe that's what survival really means. You say quietly, not just escaping death, but remembering how to live again. He nods, smiling. Yes, they lived to remember, and we remember so they can live. You walk a little farther until you reach the edge of a small pond. The surface is still, glassy, reflecting the clouds above. This was a bomb crater once. The guide says, now it's just a pond for fish. You stare into the reflection, green trees, blue sky, your own face half shadowed by the sunlight. So the earth healed, you murmur. It always does, he says, slowly, quietly, like the people who came from it. You sit on the grass, letting your fingers trail through the water. It's cool, smooth, gentle, the opposite of everything the tunnels were. You imagine the sound of rain falling into this pond, mixing with the voices of those who once listened to the rain from below. Do you think they knew? You ask, that what they built would last this long? He shakes his head. They weren't thinking about the future. They were thinking about the next hour, the next breath. That's the secret to endurance. You don't plan to last forever. You just refuse to end. The simplicity of it makes you smile. He looks toward the trees, his voice almost a whisper. Come, there's one last place to see. The tunnels are gone now, but their echoes still live where people gather to tell the stories. You rise and follow him down the path, leaving behind the pond, the mounds, and the invisible heartbeat of the earth. The sound of your footsteps fades into the rustle of leaves. And for a moment, It almost feels like the tunnels are walking beside you, quiet, unseen, but never forgotten. The jungle path narrows again, winding toward a quiet clearing where the sunlight filters through like honey. The ground here feels different, firmer, smoother, as if countless feet have walked this way before. At the center stands a simple wooden structure, half museum, half shrine. The guide slows his pace, his voice softening. This is where their story ends, he says, and where ours begins. You approach the structure. Inside, the air is cooler. The faint smell of incense lingers, mixed with the earthy scent of bamboo and dust. The walls are covered with old photographs, grainy black and white images of faces caught between fear and determination. Men, women, children, the tunnel people. You move slowly along the wall, tracing each photo with your eyes. There's a woman holding a baby, her clothes stained with soil. A group of young men laughing, their eyes too old for their age. A child, no more than 5, sitting cross-legged beside a lantern. You realize that none of them are looking at the camera. Every gaze is turned slightly away, as if they're still watching the world above them. These are the ones who built the underground, the guide says. They dug with their hands, carried earth in baskets, slept in darkness so others could wake in peace. You nod silently. The air feels heavy, sacred. He continues, most of them never became soldiers in the way history remembers. They didn't wear medals, but without them, there would be no war stories, only silence. You stop before a glass case. Inside lies a single, rusted shovel, its handle worn smooth, the blade thin from use. There's a dent near the edge, shaped like a fingerprint. You stare at it, realizing it once carved out the same tunnels you just crawled through. That shovel, your guide says, belonged to a woman who dug for 7 years. She said the earth talked to her. When the bombs fell, she listened to the soil instead of the sky. You swallow hard. Did she survive? He nods. She did, but she said she could never sleep on a bed again. Only on the ground. You don't say anything. There's nothing to say. Farther down, another display catches your eye, a small, hand-carved flute made of bamboo. They played music down there too? You ask. Yes, he says, when the air was too heavy. When fear was too loud. They played songs to keep breathing steady. The flute was softer than bombs, but it reminded them that life was still theirs. You imagine it, the faint, trembling sound of a bamboo flute echoing through the tunnels while the earth above shuddered under explosions. Music as rebellion, melody as survival. You move to another display. Letters preserved under glass. The ink faded to a soft brown. You lean in and read a line written in careful script, "If we live, tell them we were not afraid." You exhale slowly. They weren't lying. You whisper. The guide smiles faintly. Fear was there, yes, but courage is just fear that keeps moving. You step back, taking in the room again. Each photograph, each object, feels like a voice. Together, they hum softly, a low vibration that fills the air, not sound, but presence, the same kind of presence you felt in the tunnels. This place, your guide says, is more than memory, it's continuation. Every visitor carries a piece of the silence home with them. You glance at him. Do you still go down there often? He shakes his head. Not much anymore. The tunnels are smaller now. Older. but I dream about them sometimes. The quiet, the smell of earth. It's strange, isn't it? The things that once terrified us can become comforting. You understand, darkness becomes familiar when it's the only thing that listens. You walk outside again. The sunlight greets you like an old friend. Warm but not blinding this time. The jungle hums with life. Insects sing, leaves whisper, birds flash through the branches. Your guide stops beside a small stone marker engraved with a few words in both Vietnamese and English. You kneel to read them. Beneath this soil, people lived so others could dream. You trace the inscription with your fingers. It's perfect, you say softly. He nods. They built a world no one was meant to see. And somehow, it became a mirror for all of us. The tunnels weren't just about war, they were about endurance, unity, trust, about what humans become when the light disappears. You stay there for a moment, letting the silence sink in. The ground beneath you feels solid, alive. You imagine the layers below, rooms, corridors, whispers of laughter long since swallowed by time. You realize the tunnels were never really abandoned. They simply changed shape. The earth kept them. Finally, your guide turns toward the trail leading back. Come on, he says gently. We should go. It's getting late. You walk in silence for a while. The path is the same, but it feels different now, like you're walking on the skin of a memory. Every step reminds you that history doesn't vanish. It just buries itself deeper until someone decides to listen. As the trees thin, you catch a glimpse of the sunset. The sky burns in shades of gold and crimson. Clouds stretched like ribbons. It looks like the color of the clay you crawled through. Your guide glances at you. You know, he says quietly. People always ask why they couldn't survive down there. But the truth is, they weren't meant to. Those tunnels belonged to another kind of human. One who understood silence better than sound. You smile faintly. And yet, they left us a story loud enough to hear half a century later. He nods, eyes glinting with pride. Exactly. You stop walking and turn back one last time. The forest glows under the dying sun. Somewhere far below, the tunnels rest, dark and quiet, the earth breathing softly over them like a blanket. You whisper, half to yourself, half to them, thank you. The wind stirs, gentle and warm, carrying the scent of soil and rain. It almost feels like an answer. Your guide's voice breaks the stillness. Calm and kind, that's the end of the story, he says, but not the end of what it means. You nod slowly. The day dims, your heartbeat quiets, and the world seems to soften at the edges. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the echoes fade gently into silence. The tunnels, the songs, the courage, they're still there, breathing somewhere beneath your feet. End of script. Sweet dreams.